The Assad family, a history of Syrian dictatorship and its fall. The Assad family evolved into one of the most infamous dynastic regimes of the modern era. Their reign in Syria, which began in 1970 with a military coup, transformed the country into one of the Middle East's most ruthless dictatorships. This story is not just about power and tyranny, but also about manipulation, clan politics, and a relentless fight for survival. This article will examine how the Assad family seized and held power in Syria for decades, plunging the country into chaos and decay. Hafez al-Assad, the future dictator, was born in 1930 in a mountain village near Latakia called Kardaha. He belonged to the Alawite religious minority, which comprised only about 12% of Syria's population. Alawites were a marginalized community at that time, often facing discrimination. From a young age, Hafez stood out for his determination. He joined a military academy in Homs, which allowed him to overcome the poverty of his community. Becoming a military pilot was a defining moment in his life. Hafez leveraged the military to further his career and expand his political power. An interesting fact, even in his youth, Hafez was renowned for his tactical mind. As contemporaries noted, he frequently engaged in debates, supporting his arguments with meticulous reasoning. This skill served him well in his rise within the political hierarchy. After Syria's independence, the country fell into political turmoil marked by repeated coups and regime changes. Amid this instability, Hafez found his path to power through the Ba'ath Party, which promoted Arab nationalism and socialism. The Ba'athists came to power in 1963 through a military coup. Hafez gradually consolidated his influence by occupying senior posts in the army. In 1966, another internal coup elevated him to Minister of Defense. It was in this role that he began building his political base. A critical turning point came with Syria's defeat in the Six-Day War with Israel in 1967. Hafez used this military disaster to consolidate his power, placing the blame on political opponents for their incompetence. In 1970, Assad staged a coup known as the Corrective Movement, installing himself as president and initiating his dynastic reign. Once in power, he frequently employed psychological manipulation. For instance, he often summoned high-ranking officials for late-night meetings to exhaust them and gain an upper hand in negotiations. As president, Hafez tightened control over Syria's political, military, and social life. He styled himself as the father of the nation and portrayed himself as the only guarantor of stability. His portraits and statues lined streets, and some villages had cultural centers named in his honor. Repression became widespread, with the secret police, mukhabarats, surveilling citizens, imprisoning dissidents, and eliminating regime opponents. Tens of thousands were jailed for their political beliefs. Hafez also strategically placed Alawite elites in key military and government positions, creating a regime reliant on a single community. This fueled resentment among the Sunni majority. At the same time, Assad portrayed himself as a protector of the Sunni majority to stave off sectarian conflict. He famously declared, "Syria is the heart of the Arab world," a statement that bolstered his regional support. Hafez ruled Syria for over 30 years, transforming it into a police state. His regime was infamous for its brutal repression. One of the bloodiest episodes was the suppression of a Muslim Brotherhood uprising in Hama in 1982. Between 10,000 and 40,000 people were killed in the military operation, and the city was left in ruins. Despite his repression, Assad cultivated an illusion of stability by exploiting divisions among Syria's ethnic and religious groups. Internationally, he navigated a delicate balance between the Soviet Union and the West. In the early 1980s, he even met with Henry Kissinger to discuss the strategic future of the region, bolstering his international standing. Hafez died in 2000, and power passed to his son Bashar al-Assad. Bashar had not been groomed for leadership initially, as his elder brother, Basil, was the heir apparent. However, Basil's death in a car crash in 1994 forced Bashar, who was studying ophthalmology in London, to return and take the reins of power. Bashar's early image as an educated and progressive leader raised hopes for reform and modernization. He was educated at elite schools in Damascus, graduated from medical school, and pursued further studies in the UK. However, upon returning to Syria, he quickly embraced the authoritarian and clan-based system established by his father. In his early years, Bashar announced reforms and launched the Damascus Spring, a brief period of political openness that was soon quashed. Power became even more centralized in Bashar's hands and those of his inner circle. His wife, Asma Assad, also played a prominent role in shaping the regime's public image. Initially seen as a modern, westernized figure, she was later criticized for supporting the dictatorship. Asma al-Assad's background. Educated in London, she initially trained as an economist and worked in banking. Her marriage to Bashar marked a turning point in her life. In 2011, inspired by the Arab Spring, Syrians began protesting for reforms. The demonstrations quickly escalated into violent clashes, and Bashar's regime responded with brutal repression, plunging the country into civil war. The war fractured Syria into numerous factions, including Islamist groups, Kurdish forces, and moderate opposition. Despite widespread bloodshed, Assad clung to power with support from Russia and Iran. However, by November 2024, the tides had turned. On November 27, 2024, Syrian rebels launched an offensive, capturing Aleppo by November 30th with little resistance. The rebels then advanced south, swiftly taking Homs. Heavy clashes occurred during the assault on Hama, but the city ultimately fell. By December 8th, Damascus was under rebel control. Bashar al-Assad fled the country, abandoning his family and closest allies, a move condemned even by his former supporters. The fall of the Assad regime sparked jubilant celebrations across Syria. In Damascus, thousands took to the streets, chanting slogans of freedom and tearing down symbols of the regime. In Qamishli, Kurds toppled a statue of Bashar al-Assad, marking the end of an era of dictatorship. However, the celebrations were tempered by the daunting challenges of rebuilding and establishing a stable government. The story of the Assad family is one of manipulation, repression, and fear. The rule left deep scars on Syria, turning it into one of the world's most unstable regions. The fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime in 2024 opened a new chapter in the country's history, one of both hope and uncertainty.